January the 6th marks a year since the attack on the US Capitol building, which saw thousands of protesters storm the complex in Washington, D.C. Following a speech by former President Donald Trump, his supporters marched towards the Capitol and breached the building's security cordon. 5 people died and dozens were injured as the mob ransacked congressional offices and infiltrated the Senate chamber. Investigations to find those responsible for the attack are ongoing. But President Joe Biden has condemned his predecessor for inciting the mob and threatening the country's democracy.
For the first time in our history, a president had not just lost an election, he tried to prevent the peaceful transfer of power as a violent mob breached the Capitol. But they failed. They failed. And on this day of remembrance, we must make sure that such attack never happens again.
Many rioters that stormed the US Capitol were followers of QAnon, an unfounded conspiracy theory. A recent poll by Ipsos found that 7% of Americans still believe the conspiracy theory versus 18% a year ago. So Matthew, is QAnon still influential? And where are the followers 1 year later? Where do they stand?
Well, Rue, it's true that in recent months we haven't heard a lot about QAnon, but that doesn't mean that the movement has disappeared. Let's just remind ourselves. QAnon is an online group that believes an unfounded theory that there exists an elite ring of Democrats and celebrities who are Satan-worshipping paedophiles trying to traffic children for sexual purposes. QAnon believers posit the theory that Donald Trump, the former US president, took office to try and take down this ring. And it's an unfounded theory that has been growing in recent years, not just in the United States, but also in Europe. And QAnon was thrust into the spotlight at the Capitol riots when people could be seen wearing shirts or indeed carrying banners with the large letter Q. But since those riots and the inauguration of Joe Biden, what has happened to QAnon? Well, last year, a number of its groups were removed from platforms like Facebook and Twitter, forcing QAnon believers into echo chambers on alternative messaging platforms. Things like Parler or Gab, which claim to promote free speech, have limited regulation, and have fewer users. And we've previously seen that even in these echo chambers, they're also changing their habits. For example, one of the most recent posts by the user known as Q urged people online to, in his words, drop all references to QAnon to avoid censorship. And offline, we are also seeing QAnon believers taking matters into their own hands. Let's not forget that Marjorie Taylor Greene, an elected congresswoman in Georgia, has previously endorsed QAnon and its theories. And at the same time, you have other believers who have been trying to enter local schools and local law enforcement, where they can continue to spread theories even without using the words QAnon. This is something that a lot of analysts are describing as a secret war. So, Rue, even though QAnon remains fractured after the Capitol riots, we are still seeing its believers using alternative methods to continue to spread unfounded theories and baseless claims online and also offline.
Thank you, Matthew. For more on the anniversary of the Capitol Hill attack, I'm joined by Thomas Gift. He is the director of the UCL Center on US Politics. Thank you for joining us. President Biden was very clear over where he places the blame for the riots last year, squarely on President Donald Trump. How much influence is the former president still holding, and how dangerous could he be?
Well, Donald Trump, I think, has a viable chance of a 2024 comeback. It's as simple as that. I mean, it's hard to describe to an international audience the strength of Trump's pull on America's political right. All the factors that led to his rise in 2016, almost none of those have dissipated. And for some, January 6th is just going to recede into the background. And so I think what we're possibly going to see is Trump trying to return in 2024. I mean, his strength on the base is just unparalleled. A significant portion of Americans, irrespective of impeachment 1.0, impeachment 2.0, what happened on January 6th, none of that seems to matter. It was a continuous trend during his time of office, and it's sort of continued since Joe Biden took the oath of office.
The Republicans are taking the chance to criticize President Biden's record in office, heading into the midterms too. What does Joe Biden need to do to change?
Well, I think that Joe Biden faces some real serious challenges. I mean, the coronavirus has continued to spread with the Omicron variant, had a botched withdrawal from Afghanistan several months ago. Uh, the United States is still suffering from very high levels of inflation. I mean, all of those are big issues, and it's one reason why many experts expect Democrats not to do very well in the 2022 midterms. I think there are lots of things that Joe Biden can do to get back on message. I think probably the most important is to continue to speak to these bread and butter issues that affect all Americans, the economy and COVID. They're the two ones that are at the very top of the agenda, and all the rest of these issues, I think, kind of fade into the background relative to them. So he really needs, I think, to stay on message, stay on point, and not get distracted by some of these other political challenges.
We've been hearing about the QAnon supporters who were involved in the Capitol attack. Some segments of the US public still believe that that election was stolen. So how dangerous is this for future elections?
Well, we haven't seen a measurable reduction of partisan polarization since January of last year, and it's really dangerous. I mean, if anything, I think you can argue that it's gotten worse. And the most pernicious aspect of this divisiveness is not that just Republicans and Democrats are disagreeing over specific policy issues. That's always been the case. It's now that they disagree over fundamental precepts bearing on American democracy itself. So there needs to be a healthy center-right in America, but that's impeded when leadership doesn't stand up to conspiracy theories, to disinformation, to lies like the ones that ultimately laid the groundwork for January 6th. If there's one thing that we know, it's that the Capitol insurrection didn't happen spontaneously. It was born from a months-long campaign by Trump and others on the right to stir distrust in institutions of power, to foster some of these misinformation related to QAnon. And in fact, for example, a recent poll by the Washington Post showed that 40% of Republican voters now think that violence against the government is justified. That reveals just how activated the extreme elements of the right are right now. Again, it needs to be said, this is not the entire Republican Party, but it is a non-trivial fraction of the electorate.